Hello all, I hope you're doing well. We hear quite a lot on the right these days. Britain is a Christian country. And I saw Restore Britain tweet this out, and it got me in a bit of a contemplation as to whether this is really true. And I thought I'd explore this because I think we can learn a lot about ourselves, our past, the nature of who we are, and what's coming down the line by exploring this. Now, you may be aware that Restore Britain is Rupert Lowe's new political vehicle. So it's obviously a popular sentiment that he's trying to play to there. Now, I think there are two parts to their claim. Britain is a Christian country, number one. I think this one's a bit easier to deal with because, to be blunt, it's not a Christian country anymore. Sorry, it's not. There's no point pretending it is. You know, in terms of church attendance, it's extremely low. Most people who are indigenous Brits are secular these days. The strongest religion in terms of energy is probably Islam. The one that the powers that be sympathise with the most is probably Islam too. And someone like me who is a Christian and is very interested in going to different churches knows if you go to many of them these days, you'll find they're very soft liberalism. They've been taken over by the regime on one side. If they haven't, they're very much looked down upon. And many of the churches are kept alive by African congregations and other groups who've moved here. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to call it a Christian country now. We certainly were one at one time. And this leads to the next biggest question. Were we built on Christian values? And I think this is where the real meat of the issue comes through, where we can really learn quite a lot about ourselves. Now, again, it's undeniable that Britain came of age through Christian institutions. And us as a collective, as well as individuals, had our worldview, our psychology shaped by a Christian moral universe. I think a good place to start with that is the Sermon on the Mount. That's really the basis, if you like, of lots of the Western moral understanding. But does that then mean that, well, you know, just because Britain is Christian, that we're the same as every other Christian nation out there? You know, from Ghana to Italy, to Argentina and so on. Well, of course it doesn't. And this is where a big criticism is coming up, and I would say a valid criticism from sections of the right, most of them who aren't Christian, but I think their point is valid nonetheless, that look, you can't divorce Britain, or at least England, from its Anglo-Saxon history like you can't divorce Scotland, Ireland or Wales from their Celtic history. You know, these are fundamental parts of who we are. We don't tend to deal with this dynamic very well, I don't think, on the right. You know, it's almost two camps. You have the sort of more ethno side, we're Anglo-Saxons, we're Celts, whatever, and the more religious side, no, we're Christians. But I think in the traditionalist understanding, it's perfectly sane to combine both of those views. For instance, you know, we can tell that Christianity in Britain has a very Anglo-Saxon feel, or at least it did. That's why we have the Anglican Church. Now, I know many Catholics out there will say, well, all that is, you know, Henry VIII being an opportunist and wanting to get divorced. And, you know, of course, there's some logic to that. But I think if we're being fair, there's a bit more to the Anglican tradition than that. It's classically English, the Anglican tradition. It speaks right through to Brexit, you know, not quite seeing ourselves as part of the continent, kind of our own people. We're part of Europe, definitely, but we're also doing our own thing. And that, of course, spoke to the Anglo world, the Australians and the Americans. Of course, it's all changed now, or it's changing. But historically, there was that uniqueness within us. And I think we can see this more broadly with how Christianity played out in Europe. Famously, the Protestant nations all really form part of the Germanic group, the Scandinavians, Northern Germany, the British, and so on, the Dutch. And the Catholic nations pretty much remain, broadly speaking, the Romance nations. France, you know, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and so on. Of course, Germany is a bit of a one in the middle of both, really, because you have like Bavaria, which is very Catholic, and the north, you know, very Protestant and so on. And even within that, we can see there's very specific understandings of the tradition. So, you know, Anglicanism presented itself as the via media. That's Latin for the third way. And the idea is, you know, we're sort of between the extremes of Protestantism on the one side and Catholicism on the other. You know, we don't want the distant power structure of the Pope, but we also want to maintain a sense of tradition. We don't like it getting a little bit too unhierarchical, as some of the Protestant denominations tend to focus down on. You can just be a lay theologian and you're the same level as the Pope, basically, in some Protestant traditions. Now, again, whether you agree with this or disagree with this is beside the point. The point I'm making is there was a sense of moderation, which is at the heart of English Anglo-Saxon identity. The sort of the middle way, if you like. And we can even see this now in our politics. It's normally the person who gets voted in is the person who presents themselves, presents being the key word, as the most moderate. This was very Blair. And, I'm not too far left, I'm not too far right. And since that, the mainstream politicians have tried to play to that line. I remember when Keir Starmer was, made Labour leader, and some these lefty radical types, for Gaza types, they were yelling at him and all this sort of stuff. And I thought that's excellent marketing for him. The Labour machine probably knew that. That's why they were happy for it to go out. Because to the centrist dad, it makes him think, oh yeah, he's not a radical lefty like Corbyn. The crazy nutty people with nose rings and blue hair and, F you and, screw the West t-shirts on. You don't really want to be seen to be associated with them. It's very classic, if you like, in the English tradition. So you can probably see where I'm going with this, and I think this is very poorly understood, but it's that intersection between the religious tradition and the uniqueness of a people which create the specifics of their own understanding of said religious tradition. It's why, when you look at, say, the African church, a lot of it is quite nuts, basically. There's lots of shouting, there's lots of screaming, there's lots of what's called Pentecostalism, all this sort of stuff. Same with the South American church. It's a bit more out there. Whereas something that might appeal to us is very much grounded in our identity as a people. And as you might imagine, modernity hates to acknowledge that there might be group-based differences. And even the modern Christian church does, and many modern people do. So the idea is, no, we're all the same. As long as people are Christian, England will be no different. That's a sort of civic nationalist type view. Of course, whether that's really true or not, I think is really open to question. As I say, just look at how Christianity split in its understanding amongst the Germanic side of Europe and, if you like, the Latin side of Europe. And this leads me on to the next point, and I think Restore Britain might be making a rod for their own back here. You have to be careful using this language because it just implies, well, as long as everybody's Christian, everything will be fine. Well, that's not exactly the case. You can get many people coming in from different parts of the world who may well be Christian, or at least say they are. But in reality, their understanding of Christianity is going to be completely alien to us. It's not going to form the basis of our own understanding. And second to that, we also have to acknowledge that the Christian values of today have been completely corrupted. I just made a video on the sister channel, The Sacred Way, check it out down in the description, about how the modern Anglican Church is like having a trans dad. Young men are looking to their fathers for guidance, for structure, for how to be a man, for how to deal with women, for how to be a responsible father in their own lives. And they've realised their dad's gone trans and is wearing a skirt, twirling his hair, saying, call me Deborah from now on. That's basically the same situation as the Anglican Church. So even when we're saying, we're a Christian country built on Christian values, what do we mean? Because when we look to the very epicentre of the Christian tradition in, England, Britain now, it's completely corrupted. It's just basically a skin suit for liberalism, and quite a woke form of liberalism as well. Now this brings me to the real core issue of this video. And that's, well, what do we really mean then by Christian values? Because I would assume most of you watching this, you probably don't think we mean, trans, woke LGBTQ, which is basically the modern Anglican Church, the corrupted Anglican Church. That's not Christian values. And we might take it one step back, because very often people will say, well, we mean Christian values as in it's not Islamic. We kind of have structures around marriage. But at the same time, we're broadly quite accepting. We have a compassionate view on things. But at the same time, we have quite firm laws when it comes to, misbehaviour and so on. And here again is where I'd like to put a bit of a spanner in the works, because that's not really Christianity properly understood. I think very often what we call Christianity in this day and age, and especially what many on the right who don't like Christianity will criticise Christianity for, and sometimes rightly so, is essentially post-Enlightenment Christianity. So you see Jordan Peterson talk about this, or he used to, about the idea that, Christianity is always evolving and was basically giving birth to the Enlightenment and rationalism and so on. I don't really think that's true. Again, I think that's the intersection between elements of, if you like, of the Germanic, specifically the Anglo mind, going a bit too material. The real point here is, if we were to really root ourselves in real Christian values, which is basically doing what Christ says and the gospel says, a lot of that would not even be part of the pre-woke liberal world. I mean, some of the stuff, even building up in the Victorian era, would still be, to real Christianity, too liberal. And what I mean is, if you actually bother to read the Gospels, people like St. Paul are very clear. Women shouldn't speak in church, for instance. He's very clear on that. Now, in the Anglican Church, they actually call this the Paul problem. As you'd imagine, the LGBTQs and the women don't like Paul. They think, well, you've added that on. We're just going to go with what Jesus said. I made a video on the sister channel as well saying Jesus never speaks about actual down-the-line laws, do this, don't do that. He speaks in principles, i.e. root yourself in God, root yourself in love, and the rest will make sense. But you're never going to get things perfect in manifest reality or the physical world, to put it more simply. But the point here is that if we're to go by real Christian values, which are very patriarchal, then that would be too strong for most people. Because we have to be honest, most people, even those that are saying, we're Britain, we're a Christian country built on Christian values, what they want is a sort of soft, pre-woke liberal Christianity. But that Christianity is demanding. It's really demanding. It demands that you forego yourself. That means that you don't live a me-centric life anymore. It means that you say, do you know what, I don't come first. God comes first and his will comes first, then the community. And this is really what our ancestors lived by. Now that was half because it was rough back in the day, But very often people had nothing to eat. They had no contraception, so they had, many, many children, many of whom died. And your life was basically service to the family, service to the community, service to God. These are hard-line values, and these are hard things to address and face in the modern era. Real Christianity, the real tradition, is not for the faint-hearted. And I'm not saying this because I want to put people off, but it's to wake us up to what the reality of Christianity is. Jesus isn't just some hippie wandering through the desert being like, yeah, peace, man, do what you want to do, yeah, it's all good. This idea we have is a bit false. So while I'm on board with saying we're a Christian country built on Christian values, the Christian tradition and our own Anglo or Celtic understanding on the British Isles, we have to actually mean it. We can't just say, yeah, we're built on that, but we don't really care about it anymore, because we'll just get what we've got now. The church as the institution will get taken over by some rogue ideology like wokeness. And plus, we'll just get eaten alive by Islam because they do believe it and they are acting in complete alignment with the tradition most of the time. So what I mean is, to call ourselves a Christian country, we have to live by those values, which means turning away from the world of pleasure, getting married, having children, being loyal to one another, putting other people first, living by the very hardline values about denying the self and going on a journey of real spiritual transcendence so you can evolve and become a greater, better, stronger man, a better leader in your own community. These aren't just little games and ideas. It seems to me, if we really are to rely on these things, we have to mean it. So in essence, it seems to me that if we really are to turn a corner, we have to understand who we are as a people and our uniqueness, but with that, what our tradition really is, what it really demands. We need a viable alternative away from materialist modernity. If we don't have that, or we can't commit to it, or only want to do so with half measures, we pretty much open ourselves up to annihilation when it comes to the health of a long-term tradition. This is exactly why I started the sister channel, The Sacred Way. You might want to check it out down below if you're interested in these themes. It's all about personal and spiritual transformation. Other than that, do let me know what you think down below. I dare say a few people might not like this one, but never mind. It's all about debate. And do subscribe to the channel if you're new.